if someone didn't get, if let's say they have trauma because they were emotionally neglected or something like that, like how would one do that in order to like have that experience? Like what, or any other example you could give?
Yeah, so there are several actually. So I'm trained in attachment focused EMDR, and we do incorporate that into our model as well. So that's Laurel Parnell's model. And she talks about resource installation. So it may be a nurturing caregiver figure, right? And it's looking at those qualities, characteristics, skills, attributes of a nurturing figure. It doesn't have to be somebody in their life. It can be somebody real, it can be somebody created, but then we would look at taking those qualities, characteristics, and attributes and really honing in on those, right? Trying to deepen the experience of that. I often use Rick Hanson's HEAL technique, where he says, we need to first have an experience, real or created. So if my experience is isolation or abandonment, I need to have an experience of connection. So we have this experience of connection, real or created. Maybe it's created using the qualities and characteristics of this nurturing figure. Then we want to enrich the experience. So I often invite people to enrich it by taking it in with all of their senses. So, what would it look like, sound like, smell like? Anytime we're tapping into that right hemisphere, we're enriching from an embodied perspective, the emotional felt sense of that experience. Then I might look at, like what would your body posturing be like? What would theirs be like? What would the facial gestures look like? So we're just trying to make it richer and richer. He then says we need to absorb that experience. So for us, because I'm trained in Laurel Parnell's resource installation model, we'll tap it in. So we'll just bilaterally stimulate the brain and tap in the connection, that embodied felt state, when it feels solid for that person. And then the linking, the L, is for repeated pairing. So that's the harder part. So that means every time all of those old kind of messages and neural networks and neural pathways light up that say, oh my gosh, nobody cares, or you're alone, or, I'm so lonely. And we have years and years, perhaps decades and decades of messaging reinforcing that. We want to go, okay, there is that, right? We're going to validate it. It's not about ignoring it. But it's about noticing, yes, there is that. There's the pain, there's the hurt, there's the isolation. But then we redirect the energy and attention to where we want to focus. So if healing and moving forward and forming new neural pathways is what we want to do, then we're redirecting instead to that experience of connection, right? And then going back through that process of enriching it, absorbing it, and that repeated pairing of it allows us to form new neural pathways.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing, some of those different modalities for people too. So, so what, you may have touched on this, but what is specifically your intensive trauma therapy?
Oh, so we have a bit of a different model of treatment that we use with clients. And what we found is that a lot of clients in their communities don't have access to trauma-specific treatment models like ours. So we've had quite a few people come from out of province or even out of country to do treatment with us. And when we do an intensive model, basically what we do is we structure it so that we're getting in there and doing that work in a relatively quick, safe, structured way. But we're also weaving in things like breath work and meditation and mindfulness. We have a yoga practitioner that comes in and does some sound healing and breath work and meditation in between the sessions. So we're just titrating it to make sure that people are able to get in there and clear out, the stuff that's taking up the most space, but at the same time, re-regulating their nervous system throughout. It just, I find, helps to enhance the treatment and accelerate it. So the model itself that we use, people are generally regulated when they do the trauma processing anyways, because it's quite healing. So even though we're getting in there and we're dealing with stuff that has tremendous charge, we're working through it. Whereas people, I find, with their trauma, when they're in that fear looping, they go back to like the peak period of fear or terror, and they seem to get stuck there. And that's when people will become hyper-aroused and flood, or hypo-aroused, and they'll shut down and dissociate. Whereas when we're working with them, we're working through it in a safe, structured way, and we're moving them past that typical point of peak terror to disrupt that fear looping process, and then playing it through, but also looking at what they needed and wanted to have happen, and resource installing that, reframing messages to the security guard part of their brain. So it's quite a layered process, and by the end of a single session, people are generally quite regulated. But then it's about taking it a little deeper with the nervous system and really working to clear out any of that excess stress that's been held in the body, to help them shift through that in a fully embodied way.